as technology does.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Smisha Tearlach. I'm Tearlach. My birth name is Charles, but I prefer to go by Tearlach. Um, I live in Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis. I was very fortunate to have been born to a Welsh mother and a Scottish father, and my mother's family are Welsh speaking, and my father's mother was Gaelic speaking. Always Gaelic speaking. And uh, so I was brought up with those languages, um, but it was a bit scattered. So as an adult, I had to sit down, knuckle down, and get to a certain standard.
Okay, so you speak Gaelic and you speak Welsh languages
Yes.
and English, of course.
And my undergraduate degree wasn't in Italian, so Italian's a
Wiser.
yeah. Um, but the reason I did Italian was, I mean, I always enjoyed the Italian language and Italy, but people kept telling me that Welsh and Gaelic were useless, they weren't going to get me anywhere. And so I actually started a degree in French and Spanish. And in my first year, we could do modules in other Romance languages, which included Portuguese and Italian. And I started doing Italian, and I preferred it to French and Spanish, so I switched in my first year. Um, and in many ways, I don't regret that decision, but yeah, I definitely would have come to Welsh and Gaelic sooner if people hadn't been telling me that's not going to get you anywhere. That's useless. And what will you do with that? To the extent that I I never really had a cultural cringe, but I think I was quite passive. Whereas nowadays, oh, I won't let people get away with comments like that. Get an earful from
Excellent.
me.
Good, good. And I think that's exactly the way it should be.
Yes.
So, as a Gaelic speaker and you're living in Stornoway, can you
Mhm.
tell me what life is like as a Gaelic speaker out there?
Sure. Well, um, the first thing to say is I love it. I absolutely, um, I love being on this island. I love the dialect of this island. It's Lewis dialect that I speak. It's with Lewis that I have my connections. And I don't really feel me unless I'm using Gaelic. Uh, I feel a real connection to the language to the extent that on occasion I can almost be reduced to tears by it. And when I hear other people speaking Gaelic, it's almost I can almost feel the language and the ancestry and the heritage and the identity and the land and the sea kind of penetrating me. And I
Hmm.
think I have to be careful about romanticizing these things because my PhD is in Gaelic, in Gaelic dialects, and part of my thesis was actually on um, public discourses connected to Gaelic and the islands. And I criticized people romanticizing the islands and romanticizing Gaelic. I criticized people using terms such as remote,
Hmm.
and I criticized people that um, sort of rated usefulness on economic uh, parameters,
Hmm.
which I think is so short sighted. Um, the economy is important to some extent, but um, it's not the be all and end all. In
Hmm.
fact, for me, a lot of the time when people talk about usefulness, they're referring to the economy. And for me, the economy is about making rich people richer. And everything has kind of been put in place to make us admire the rich so that we're not fighting against them. I also want to be careful not to be too political when I speak about Gaelic, because there was, I mean, my thesis kind of touched on it. I had a whole section in my thesis about maps as political tools and tools of oppression,
Mm-hmm.
and I tried in my thesis to um, kind of recalibrate the way that we view maps of the Hebrides. And I did that by, for example, criticizing the idea that the Hebrides is always in the sort of northwest corner of a
Mm-hmm.
map in a remote, empty, near empty corner. And I tried to do upside down maps and maps to the side, and I just tried to play around with maps. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you that is because a big part of me being a Gaelic speaker, which is kind of tough, and I don't know how to say this without sounding arrogant, is after all the years of studying the history and the public discourses and the narratives, I must admit that sometimes I think I feel the weight, the heaviness of what is effectively a minoritized culture,
Mm.
but not minoritized by accident.
Yeah.
This has been a deliberate attempts through history to get rid of this language, and it's ongoing. And so some people can, when someone says, "Oh, that's not useful, that's not going to get you anywhere," maybe some people can dismiss it. I feel a real weight, and it can get to me. It can really affect my mood,
Mm-hmm.
and it can affect my ability to respond to people because I get so wound up.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I hate more as well of being told to calm down, or being told that, I'm being, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm being dramatic, or, I'm just looking to be offended, because living in a minoritized culture or marginalized culture, and I'm sure you'll understand this, the dominant culture has the privilege of being calm.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only am I wound up at their ignorance and their refusal to just be respectful, like, really, is being respectful of me and my culture really that much of an inconvenience for you? Not just
Yeah.
that, it's also, I get really irate at having to play by their rules. Like, oh, I have to be calm because I have to assimilate to your culture for you to listen to me. That's
Mm-hmm.
effed up, man. That's effed up. Um, so uh, I would say that for me, being a Gaelic speaker is almost a very emotional, turbulent existence. There's a
Mm-hmm.
moment of speaking to my granny. I was on the phone to her earlier today, and there's that real excitement and passion. I feel like um, I'm able to express myself, and I feel like I'm connected to the land and to you know,
Mm-hmm.
my community. And then I can go into. I mean, I avoid social media as much as I can these days because, well, especially during this horrible period, I have
Mm-hmm.
found that. But even before that, I was trying to avoid social media because when I was seeing the nasty comments by trolls and anonymous losers on social media criticizing Gaelic, getting lost because of road signs, why can't we have
Mm.
hospital beds? It just really, it really got to me. It really affected my mood.
No, 100%. And, the signs are also in English. So
Yeah, absolutely.
it doesn't make that much of a difference, to be honest.
It's
And I understand
it doesn't.
exactly what you're saying. That I interviewed Joy Dunlop, and she sang a
Oh,
little bit of a walking song, and the
mm.
hairs on my arms
Oh,
went
yes.
up, and I
Yeah.
couldn't necessarily understand exactly what she was saying, but the feeling and the emotion was in
Mm.
it. And it touches your heart because it
Yeah.
creates that connection to this is me. This
Yes.
is
Yeah.
where I'm from. And that's something really, really quite special.
It is. It is. there is a tiny bit of conflict. I mean, I love walking songs, by the way. Walking songs are really fascinating, and
Hmm.
maybe I'll pluck up the courage to sing one for you. I also love psalm singing. If you know Gaelic
Hmm.
psalm singing, my Gaelic granny is really into psalm singing.
So if we think about the sort of next question, which is, are there
Sure.
any particular stories that you would wish to tell about um,
Mm,
Gaelic life or being a Gaelic speaker, or stories you might have heard from your granny, like growing up,
yeah.
that kind of thing?
Um, yeah, I've got quite a few. There's one story. I feel like I might turn into a storyteller, but this was a story that my granny told me, and but it's sort of a fantasy story rather than a story of something that, if that makes sense, it's part of.
Hmm.
Um, so um, I'm just trying to remember it and condense it down because I think it was quite long. Okay, so there's a man in Argyllshire, and he's a fisherman, and he needs wood for his boat. So he goes into the forest to find a good tree for his fishing boat, but a mist falls on the forest, a deep mist, and he gets lost. He just can't find his way home, and he's lost in the forest for hours when he sees a light, and he goes towards the light to find a cottage in the middle of this forest, and he knocks on the door, and an elderly woman answers and asks him, "What what do you want?" And he says, "I'm incredibly sorry to disturb you, but I am lost. I can't find my way home. This mist is stopping me from finding my way home. Can I have food and shelter tonight?" And she says, "I'm not sure. I have to consult with my sisters." And she closes the door, and he can hear um, the voices of women inside the house. And the door opens again, and there's three elderly women, and they say, "We have spoken among ourselves, and we've decided to give you food and shelter, but we're going to put you in a room, and you are not to leave that room for the whole night." And he agrees.
Hmm.
So he goes to his room, and he can hear the sisters um, chanting, talking, and the curiosity gets the better of him. He goes like, I have to see what's going on. I want to see what's going on. So he tries to look through the keyhole, and he sees the three women leaning over a box, and they open the box, and one takes out a hat, and she puts the hat on, and she says Lunine, which is the Gaelic word for London,
Hmm.
and she spins into the air and disappears. And then the second sister takes out a different type of hat, but from the same box, puts it on her head. She says Lunine, and she disappears into the air. And the third one does the same, puts the hat on, Lunine, disappears. And he just can't believe his eyes. He can't believe this is happening. So he goes to the box and he sees there's another hat. So he decides to put it on, and he says Lunine. And before he knows it, the house is spinning, the forest is spinning, the mist is spinning, and then it begins to all clear up, and then he sees the stars, and then all these stones start spinning around him, and suddenly he just lands in a cellar, a damp, dark cellar with lots of barrels, and he can hear the old women, the same voices, chattering away. So he looks around the corner, and he sees they're drinking whiskey. And they're taking whiskey from these barrels, and they're drinking the whiskey, and they're having a good old time. And then they go home. They say Ergale, which is Gaelic for Argyle or
Hmm.
Argyllshire, and they disappear. But he thinks, "Oh, I'm going to treat myself to some whiskey as well. That was looks like good ushkabeha." So
Hmm.
I'll try that. And he takes a glass, and he's just about to sip it when a hand lands on his shoulder, and he turns around. It's a big man, large man, and he says, "You're the thief that's been stealing our whiskey. We haven't been able to catch you until tonight, but now you are caught." And the man is taken to court. He's put in jail in London. He goes to court, and the judge sentences him to death for stealing all this whiskey. And he tried to proclaim his innocence. "I never drank the whiskey." And the more he proclaims his innocence, the more that he winds up the court. And eventually, the judge says, "That's it. You're being hung. You're being hung tomorrow." And so the next morning at dawn, there's a crowd gathering to watch the hanging. And they put the noose over his neck. And he says, "Can I have one final request before you hang me?" And the executor thinks, "Okay, that seems reasonable." No, asks, "Sorry, what is it you want?" And he says, "I'd like to wear my hat." And the executor thinks, "Oh," says, "that seems reasonable enough." And he puts on his hat and he says, "Ergel," and everything starts spinning around. All of London starts spinning around with him, and the rope and the wood starts coming with him. He goes up in the air, and suddenly he lands in the middle of the forest that he was looking for his boat in, and where he was when the mist had come in, so he knew where he was. And he managed to get his noose off, and it is said to this day that with the wood from the gallows, his fishing boat was the strongest in all of Argyllshire. So,
I like that story. I was expecting something else. I thought maybe he would mispronounce the Gaelic for London and end up somewhere unpleasant.
yeah. I like this story because I like the twist at the end about how the gallows
Yeah.
become his.
That is it's a lovely twist because it could have gone so horribly wrong.
Yeah.
It seems a lot of the sort of Gaelic folk tales, if we or lore, if we can use those terms, tend to be quite moralistic. Is that true?
I think so. I would say so. There there's always I mean, one of the things I'm quite passionate about is expressions, sayings, idioms, and I'm always noting them down. When I hear my granny telling me them, and I always feel like actually they do have a lot to tell us about life and life on the islands, life in general, but also life on the islands. So I feel like a lot of the language is about expressing ways to make your life easier, but your life is easier when you're making it easier for other people. Now, I don't think that works in practice because good grief, can they be gossips in the Gaelic communities? And they can express judgment in some very euphemistic ways, but I think the intent is always there to survive and to maintain a strong social network, because a community on an island that is so subject to weather changes, you have to all be there for each other. So if someone falls out with someone in the village and then they need help during a storm, are they going to get it? So you're
Yeah.
always maintaining these social networks. But one of the things I would love to see, and I don't know if you would be able to do this, but in my research, because I also speak to older Gaelic speakers who I don't always look at the intersectionality between a Gaelic speaker and queer gender identities. I
Mm-hmm.
don't just focus on that. I also look at older speakers' identities
Mm-hmm.
as a native and how they connect to the land and how they connect to societal changes. Because they've seen a lot change. My
Yes.
granny, for example, she has seen so much change. Half her village is empty because it's all second homes and Airbnbs. But she grew up when every house in her village was occupied, and some of those houses were occupied by people that didn't speak English. They only spoke
Mm-hmm.
Gaelic. And the whole community worked together to survive. And now it's, she remembers that there was always something going on in the village, whether it was people fixing up the fishing boats or people, helping to shear the sheep or cut the peat or cut the grain. There was always something to do. If there wasn't something to do in your croft, you'd be going elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when you needed stuff done, people would be coming to your croft. So I talk to them about those sorts of things as well. What's your identity, and how are you connecting with the changes in the islands? And so many of them tell me that they miss the use of idiomatic phraseology. They don't use those words. That's a very academic term, idiomatic phraseology. I would love to see those get into computer games somehow. Like one of them is this is a particular favorite of mine. Nach
Mm-hmm.
Root, a Rook, and Cat, and Kulan. Um, didn't the dog, no, didn't the cat give birth to the puppy for you? Is the translation to English. And it's a way of, it's quite complicated actually, trying to explain it, because
Mm-hmm.
it has to be a series of events that fall in together. Someone has to have done better than they were expecting. So that's the first thing
Mm-hmm.
that has to happen. And then the speaker has wants to express a certain amount of disdain. They can't bring themselves to say congratulations. So when you have a combination of those two experiences, those two events, someone, maybe they went to the field to plow their field and they found some gold and they thought, oh, this might be worth something. And then it turns out, because it's a Viking ring, it's worth even more than they expected. So they've really done well for themselves unexpectedly. It's
Mm-hmm.
gone above and beyond. And you're not really happy about that. So you think that they didn't deserve it, or you think that um, perhaps they should be sharing it around. Whatever. You don't want to
Mm-hmm.
say congratulations. You're not that happy for them. So you say, Nachut, Aruk, and Hat, and Hulan. Didn't the cat give birth to the puppy for you? And they, the older speakers. I was on the phone to an older speaker on a different island relatively recently.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her that I'd learned this expression because I didn't grow up with this expression. And she burst into laughter on the phone and she said, I haven't heard that in years. And she was laughing. She really enjoyed it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and she said to me, oh, chachloinu Alberton in Lehage and Lions. So you don't hear things like that these days. And so I think that that would be a great way to get younger people engaged with this idiomatic phraseologies in the games, maybe in the game somehow. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a few things people have told me through doing this research, and immediately in my head I can almost see the game and how it would be, and
Oh,
that's what's really exciting about this. And the other
mm,
thing that I find fascinating but also immensely joyful is when anyone that I've spoken to, the way that their tone and their face and their expressions and
Mm.
gesticulations change from when they're speaking English to when they
Ah,
speak Gaelic. Gaelic
ah,
seems to look a lot more musical and a lot more emotion in the
oh,
language,
yeah.
and people's faces light up when they're speaking it. And I think this is
Oh,
a deeper connection to the heart, to the homeland, to the emotions that can be expressed in Gaelic that maybe is harder to be expressed in English.
yeah. And I think one of the things that my research has kind of shown as well is that this is kind of subconscious. When you
Mm,
kind of try to tease this out of Gaelic speakers, they don't really seem to know where you're going with it. But you can sort of see it in the grammar and the expressions and the way that they describe the worlds, that Gaelic grammar uses a metaphorical landscape.
mm-hmm,
And so you've probably learned things like ha mi uh, golf, I'm drinking. Ha mi golf tea, I'm drinking tea.
mm-hmm.
The literal translation is I am at the event of the drinking of the tea. That's how that would translate literally to English.
Oh, that's lovely. I
And
prefer that.
yeah, and so you that's one of the reasons you might have heard Irish people saying things like, I'm after going to the shops.
Yes.
It's an influence from Irish, which is related to Gaelic. And Gaelic
Mm-hmm,
speakers on this island will say that in English as well, but you don't hear it so much across Scotland. But in Ireland, you hear even non-Irish speakers saying it because it's influenced
mm-hmm,
Irish English. Here, it's influenced Hebridean English.
mm-hmm.
So you will hear my granny will say, I'm after going to the shops, or I'm after doing the messages," because you have a metaphorical landscape
Mm-hmm.
and the event is in the middle of the landscape. Time is three-dimensional for Gaelic speaker, not two-dimensional line, but
Mm-hmm.
it's this metaphorical landscape, and your proximity to the event tells people when in time the event happened. So when you're at it, you know you, you're next to it, so
Mm-hmm.
it's in present time. When you're after it, you're the other side of it. You've gone beyond it. You've walked
Right.
past
Yes,
it.
yes.
In Gaelic, you also say that something is before you. You hear Gaelic speakers say, "Och, och sé seachgan rang a ha Roms." It's a busy week that is in front of me because they're going to walk towards it. And you, what I often say to my students is, you just imagine you have this landscape because, um, like, I'm sorry, I'm going off in all different directions. I get so excited about this. Um, I actually use an image of Glencoe when I'm teaching Gaelic grammar.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I get a box, I have a little 3D box, and I put it in the middle of the Glencoe. And I show my students the different grammatical structures in Gaelic and how it's showing you your relationship to the box, um, and how physical proximity is a metaphor for time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Gaelic does as well is it has words which officially refer to the landscape, but they've come to describe um, pretty much anything a Gaelic
Mm-hmm.
speaker needs to describe. So you have the word muboch. Muboch is a summit, but Muloch Vorst is the top of the table. Muloch Mchaon is the crown of my head here. It's the top of my head. Um, Muloch and Tehe is the roof, the summit of the house. That's the literal translation, but it means
Mm-hmm.
roofs. Muloch and Tehe. Um, I love Muloch. Can be a lid as well. So
Okay.
Muloch the lid of the kettle, but literally translated to English, that means the summit of the cauldron, but it means the lid of the kettle. So my Gaelic
Mm-hmm.
granny will say, she'll say to me, she'll want me to make a tea, and she'll say, "Dún múlach a choda," close the lid of the kettle. But the literal translation is "close the summit of the cauldron," and I love it. I just absolutely love it.
That's lovely. And you can see how little things like that could really be implemented within a game because it adds that kind of magical nature, but also the. I speak Chinese, so Chinese is my second language,
Oh,
Mandarin.
oh,
And
amazing.
they have a similar kind of portmanteau word situation where you have
Yeah,
one word and then it's used in many different combinations to create different words, nouns usually, but
yeah,
also they have the same proximity to time with that before and after. So there's a few points of sort of interconnectivity there.
yeah. There
But I
will
think
be, yeah.
Gaelic is much harder than Chinese.
I think in some ways, I think one of the ways that Gaelic is hard is that I think human beings make assumptions and try to find patterns as a way of
Hmm.
making sense of the world, and it kind of defies what we expect.
Hmm.
So, for example, a DH is often pronounced R.
Mm.
We don't expect a DH to do that. So, because
Hmm.
it's kind of jarring with an assumption, I think that that makes it difficult to overcome. So, what I say to
Hmm.
my students a lot of the time is we use Latin characters, just like English and French,
Hmm.
but you almost have to think of it as a different alphabet. So, we're
Yes.
using the same characters, but it's almost like you're learning a Russian or Greek alphabet. You have to learn that the characters are doing something different from English.
That's exactly like Chinese. So a Q is a chi sound and X is a she
Oh,
sound. So it
ah,
is very difficult for people at first to learn to speak Chinese because the letters don't do what their brain tells them they should
that they
do.
should do.
Yeah.
Mm,
But once you break that
fascinating.
barrier, it's much easier.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so you mentioned there the use of idiomatic languages for games.
yeah.
Is there any other ideas for games based on Gaelic stories or culture or fairy tales or traditions that you think might be a good game?
I can think of lots of things, but I'm not sure if they make good games. um,
Which, of course, is a very subjective term anyway.
that this is true. This is very true. Because the thing is, my younger brother is a gamer,
Hmm.
so part of me is like trying to connect with what I know he likes, and he has no interest in my life. I have no interest in his life. We have no common ground.
Hmm.
Christmas is actually a couple of years in a row I've not gone home because of him. Actually, it's not because he's a gamer. I'm just um, trying to make sense of him to some extent, and I think like one of the things I think is quite interesting about the islands is what what uses you're going to make of things like what use are you going to make of the parts of a sheep.
Hmm.
The wool is going to become the tweed, but also they used to cook with the head, for example.
Hmm.
So my Gaelic granny grew up with they would put they would singe the hair off the face of the sheep,
Hmm.
and then they would put the sheep's head in boiling water to turn it into stock. And it would
Hmm.
be going for hours and hours and hours and hours, and they would turn it into a soup. And that soup is called ceannachasoch, sorry, ceannachasoch. And that's something younger people don't know anything about. When I use the word ceannachasoch, the only
Hmm.
people that know what I'm talking about is older speakers. But yet they had to find different things. They had to do different things because it's not a particularly resource-rich island in many ways.
Hmm.
They had to make use of everything, and nothing could go to waste.
Absolutely.
And they also had a lot of bartering. So my Gaelic granny was telling me, for example, that in the morning before going to school, it was her job to go down to the stream to collect water, but not just for her family, but for the neighbors as well.
Mhm.
And she said that the neighbors, I think they related to her. I think it was her great aunt. Her great aunt lived in the house next door with her uncle and cousins, I think. And she said she doesn't remember her great aunt ever standing up. She was always in bed. That's what she remembers of her. She never got out of bed. Um, but she had to get water for them as
Mhm.
well. And then, you know, when they had to do, when they went to do something, they would do it for my Gaelic granny's family as well.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things, I think she had a cow. And so before going to school, another thing that she would do would be she would take milk to different families. And then when coming home from school, she'd collect eggs. So they were bartering, they weren't paying, they
Mhm.
didn't have a shop. The other thing that she said was that her village used to have a dance hall. It's not there anymore. She had, it
Mhm.
had a little dance hall, and she said it was kind of on wooden stilts with wooden dance floor. And she said they all used to smoke in those days. You know, they were really excited. They'd come into Stornoway and buy menthol cigarettes, and they just thought they were the most chic, fabulous, glamorous, girls that you could find ever existed, and how lucky Lewis was to ever have such glamorous chicks, going dancing. And she said when they used to dance, and it was Kaylee music, she said the
Mhm.
whole building used to shake because they'd be, dancing kind of in rhythm as well. And she said the older religious men used to come outside the dance hall and pray for their souls. And they would try to stop them from going in to the dance floor as well.
Wow.
And she told me that a way to say F off in Gaelic for her generation is Dialor, which literally translates as the devil is on you. And when she told me it, she even covered her mouth and said, I can't say it again. It's so offensive. So it was really quite extreme for her.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know if that's helping you with any games of like the dance floor
Absolutely. I
and
mean,
the
the idea of My Gallic Granny, the game,
yeah,
and can you imagine? So you've got quite the older lady who's quite prim and proper, and then you sort of go through time and you find she's out there smoking and bouncing
yeah,
around on the dance
yeah,
floor. This kind of
yeah,
dichotomy. I think,
yeah,
oh, but My Gallic
absolutely.
Granny has to be made.
Yeah, yeah. She would tell me about things like still on Lewis, everything closes on a Sunday because of the Sabbath.
Oh wow.
But when she was growing up, it was even stricter. Um, they weren't allowed to play. They weren't allowed to leave the house. She said we used to cover the chicken coops with a heavy black cloth, so even the chickens and the cockerels wouldn't make a noise on the Sunday.
Oh good
Her,
God.
her father used to shave on a Saturday evening. They used to cook the food on a Saturday evening, and then Sunday, all they would do would be read the Bible, go to church, eat, pray. That was it. That's all they could do
Oh.
on a Sunday. And she said, they couldn't cook. They couldn't. Uh, she said she remembers when they finally got vehicles in the village. So that's either tells you how old she is or how long it took Lewis to come to the 20th century. I don't know which
Mhm.
one it is. A combination of the both. And she said there used to be a bus that would come on a Sunday to pick people up, to take them to church. That was the whole
Mhm.
point of the bus. And people were outraged because it was a form of work. And people, she said, there were elderly people that could barely walk, and it would be torrential rain, it would be winter and wet, gales, and they would refuse to get on the bus. They would still walk to the church.
Wow.
And then she said they would leave the dishes, they would eat and leave the dishes because no one couldn't wash themselves. Shouldn't wash their hand. They wouldn't wash their hands for the entire day.
Oh,
Not
geez.
allowed you can't even wash your hands. That was no, no, no. That's work. And then she said it would come midnight, and that would be it. People would be washing the dishes and going to the fishing boats and doing the things they needed to do. So people were literally counting down the minutes. And now there's a park not far from where I live, and it even says they're not so strict these days, but there is a sign in the park saying, "Please respect the Sabbath." So it's
Wow.
politely asking people, okay, we don't close things up as we used to, but we would kind of appreciate it if you still kept to the old ways,
Yeah. Bonnie, no do that.
Yeah. And she was my Gaelic granny was telling me that her father was a fisherman, and midnight would come, the end of the Sabbath, and then he was off to his fishing boat. So he'd even go out in the dark, in the middle of winter. He would start his job at midnight, basically on a Monday morning.
To
And
make up for the day that they've lost. Yeah. Yes, you're not really having a day off work. You're just
no,
postponing the work so you can work
yeah,
double the next day. Okay.
I think it's fascinating stuff because
Mm-hmm.
with in one way it does force you to have some time off,
Mm-hmm.
but it comes with so much judgment and societal rules, and you're not necessarily given access to these rules, and if you break the rules you're going to be judged even though no one will explain the rules to you. And
Mm-hmm.
in that way I think, especially in Lewis, the culture can be quite uh, you know like, um, Europeans. I have lots of European friends
Mm-hmm.
who think that British culture is too polite and you should be more direct. I had a German
Mm-hmm.
friend tell me, she was a bank manager in London, and she told me one day, I'm so stressed because um, my staff have been telling me that there is a slight problem, and I've got so much work to do. And I think, a slight problem, solve it then, get on with
Yeah.
it. And she found out it was a very big problem. And she said to me, why don't British people just say, there
Mm-hmm.
is a really important problem you need to deal with? They say,
Mm-hmm.
slight problem. How was I supposed to know it's a problem? And I said, yes, you don't listen to the adjective, you listen to the noun. And as a
Yes.
British person, the moment I hear the word problem, you could say, we've got a slightly tiny, minuscule bit of a problem we might have to deal with. But I hear the word problem and the alarm bells are going,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I
Tiny
think,
minuscule catastrophe.
yeah, exactly. And I think it's like that in Lewis
Mm-hmm.
at another level. And people, for example, I have a slight problem with Duolingo, with Gaelic.
Me too.
And one of the problems is, I mean, I like inclusive language. I insist my lessons are inclusive
Mm-hmm.
and positive. But
Mm-hmm.
Duolingo, for example, teaches beginners to use the word amadan, which means fool or idiot.
Hmm.
And so learners are learning on Duolingo to say things like, oh, she amadan the hunnet, you are an idiot.
Hmm.
Say that to my Gaelic granny, she's not going to tell you off. She's going to say, oh, chanilshin chumogashun. That's not very polite. And then you'll never hear from her again. That'll be the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
So I actually had a bit of a falling out with the Duolingo people because I was saying, I'm telling you, as someone who works with native speakers, this word Amadan shouldn't be taught until you have more understanding of the nuances of
Mm-hmm.
the culture. And you should be using positive language. Why are you telling people they're idiots? That's not
Mm-hmm.
very nice. That's not very inclusive.
Yeah.
You should you should be teaching nice things, positive things, things that are going to ingratiate you into the community, not things that are going to potentially have you shut down and never have access to the community again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not quite sure why I started saying that, but because of the rules and the
Yeah.
complicated rules. And my problem with Duolingo is it's not teaching those rules alongside these problematic terms. But
Yes.
this is a very conservative culture, not capital C, sort of reserved. There's a certain reservedness.
Mm-hmm.
They don't they don't like people to boast. One of the reasons they hate Trump, even though his mother is from the next village, and his mother was a native Gaelic speaker, but Gaelic speakers can't stand him
Mm-hmm.
because boastfulness, brashness, negativity, insults, they are not accepted. Now, you can bitch all you want behind someone's back. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But
But
don't boast, don't act superior,
mm-hmm.
and most importantly, uh, be euphemistic in your language when you're speaking to someone about something. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to. You can't tell. I never tell my Gaelic granny that she's done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You just never. You just never. You don't do it. And she does. My cat's hungry, so if you can hear meowing, that's my cat telling me she's hungry.
Oh.
Um, she, for example, what was it she did the other day there? And all I did was sort it out for her.
Mm-hmm.
I think she left the tap running or something. You don't tell a Gaelic speaker. So there's all these rules that learners aren't
Mm-hmm.
taught because this is a relatively rigid society. And I don't know if you can put that into computer games somehow. Like, I don't know, switch the water off without offending your Gaelic granny.
There's so many possibilities. So, would you have any final kind of words of advice for the participants of this jam who are maybe they don't speak Gaelic, or maybe they only speak a little Gaelic, or they just want to learn a bit more? What advice would you give them?
um, my advice is that um, if you are if you are interested in land issues like land ownership, and who has rights and access to the land, and how are we going to reverse issues around, say, soil erosion in Scotland,
Mhm.
or you are interested in, uh, if you are interested in how climate change is going to affect the tides and the weather, or I honestly, or you're interested in worldviews and social equality, I honestly think Gaelic is going to enrich your understanding because it's going to give you an alternative perspective,
Mhm.
and it's just going to add to your enthusiasm about these issues because you are going to begin to learn about how colo- capitalism, which is, you know, one of the major drivers of global climate change, is the evil descendant of colonialism.
Mhm.
Colonialism was never overturned, it just evolved into capitalism. And Gaelic is going to show you how that process, that evolution from feudal to colonial to capitalism, how that happened in Scotland. It's going to give you a unique take on how that happened to Scotland. And I think if you're interested in Scottish history, I don't think you have to be fluent in Gaelic, but I think you should definitely um, not just respect but celebrate Gaelic.
Hmm.
I think we should be trying to amplify the native speaker community. We want to amplify their voices, especially
Hmm.
as I was saying, you know, boastfulness is a faux pas
Hmm.
in the Gaelic community. So they don't speak up for themselves. So we want to amplify their voices. But if you were to do French history or German history, and you didn't have any French or German, you're at a major
Hmm.
disadvantage. And so many of our manuscripts and our documents and our folklore is in Gaelic. You don't have to be fluent, but you should at least think about how you can access that world that we have in our own country.
Hmm.
We have an entire alternative culture and worldview, and we should really be talking about progressive issues like feminism, gender equality, wealth equality. Uh, I think even things like um, trying to tackle period poverty, trying to make trying to look at animal rights.
Hmm.
I honestly think that talking about linguistic and cultural equality just informs and enriches those discussions.
Hmm.
And you may say, well, why Gaelic? You will definitely see that these issues are particularly important in indigenous cultures and say Turtle Island and Aotearoa.
Hmm.
But we're white, we're European, and we have benefited from colonialism. So when we start going into their culture, we have to be careful about how we negotiate those identities. But Gaelic within Scotland is for Scottish people. And so that will help you to identify with the issues that are going on in the Amazonian rainforest, in the Arctic Circle with, um, say, Canadian First Nations trying to fight against oil pipelines,
Hmm.
or whether you're talking about the Kurds and the discrimination against Kurdish people, or how China is ruthlessly um, uh, pushing a national cultural hegemonic agenda. All those indigenous languages in China are being attacked.
Hmm.
And they keep talking about Chinese dialects. So many of those languages are so different from Mandarin. They are not
Hmm.
dialects, but this is a nationalistic agenda creating a hierarchy, because once you have a hierarchy and you're a communist society, you want to get rid of hierarchy, so you get rid of the lower levels. It's a really problematic agenda.
Hmm.
Um, and when you go abroad and you go on holiday and you know that certain climate issues and women's issues and race issues are going to be caught up in class and linguistic issues as well. And I think you'll actually engage with people better. You go to Italy, you realize Italy has lots of minority languages. You go to, say, Sardinia. Sardinian is a beautiful language.
Hmm.
People barely know it exists. But Sardinia, has its own language. It's an island that's facing um, sort of climate change issues as well, and they feel a little bit suffocated by Italian and the Italian state. You go to Sardinia, you say "Sono scozzese," "Kimera how." That's how we say "How are you" in our language. Suddenly, boom! You have whole access to. Um, I don't think you'll understand the world in the same.
It's my
I
son
don't.
turning the light on for me.
You probably saw me trying to get around my plant earlier.
The other end of the room, and it was like,
I'm sorry, I'll try not to keep you any longer. I,
oh, it's so
I realize I'm
interesting. It's
gambling, but
perfectly
I just
fine.
I just want to round off by saying I don't think we will understand, say, Sardinian issues, but
Hmm.
we'll at least have an empathy and we'll have dialogue because we're on the same page.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I just find that for me, when I travel abroad, um, I just I find my travels to be so enriching and enjoyable because my connection with Gaeldom and queerdom makes me curious about what's going on in other communities.
Hmm.
And so I enjoy that. And I think other people would as well. I think turning up to Sardinia and just getting drunk and having a good time and lying on the beach, I think that's kind of soul destroying. Once you go into a coffee shop and you see an older person, and you know that all you do is say one word in Sardinian.
Hmm.
Say, no, Zuzardu is Sardinian for Sardinian. And immediately you're transformed into, I'm not a colonialist going somewhere and using my economic uh, power as a selfish tool to make myself feel better while completely ignoring the rights of
Hmm.
others. But you go there and you become a human. You're a human being
Hmm.
enjoying the diversity of our planet, whether it's global, whether it's ecological diversity, cultural diversity, gender diversity, racial diversity. These are all interconnected issues. So I don't know if that helps, though. That's my
Oh,
advice.
it's brilliant. Really, really good. So
Scottish
interesting.
feminism, Scottish, you know, environmentalism, Scottish gender equality rights, gender against hate,
Against
Scotland
it.
against racism, Scotland full Gaelic. It's all
Absolutely.
intertwined. I don't know if I
It,
feel like a
it,
bit of an idiot. I don't know why.
Absolutely not. It's something that is so deeply ingrained within us that, I've traveled a lot as well. And everywhere
Mm,
I'd gone, as soon as someone found out I was Scottish, I was welcome because we have a good
mm,
reputation. However, we're not represented in the media, in films, or in games
no,
very well at all. And that's something that
no.
troubles me deeply, but
Agreed.
to the point, it's that I bet you won't see a red car tomorrow. And because it's in your head, you'll see a lot more. So I
Mm,
spot a lot more of this sort of casual racism.
yes, so do I.
And you kind of say, well, that joke that you've just made. So, Jungle Cruise, the new film with The Rock, Disney film, just come out.
Can't, can't
And
watch it.
no, well, Jack Whitehall says if I wanted to go to a country where people babbled at me incoherently, I would visit our relatives in Scotland. And I said, well, that's horribly racist. But
Yeah,
also, if you said we'll go and visit our African cousins or our Indian, that wouldn't be allowed because that would be racist. But then how is
absolutely.
it okay for us?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a friend who she did her PhD in